Hey there, Mike Robbins here, and I am coming to you live once again. I'm excited to be here. I am live on LinkedIn as well as Facebook and YouTube today using our new StreamYard platform. So I'm excited about this. Last week I came live just on LinkedIn, but we're going to talk today about psychological safety. So psychological safety is actually create psychological safety is pillar number one in my brand new book. We're all in this together. Well, I guess it's not brand new. It came out back in April, but it's my latest book. So we're going to talk about what psychological safety is, a little bit about what can make it challenging, and then sort of dive into more specifically what you can do to create more psychological safety within your team, within your organization. So if you're being live, it's just after 11 a.m. Pacific time here on what's today, Wednesday, the 23rd of September. I don't know. I'm bad with knowing what day it is these days. But feel free to make any comments on whatever platform you're on. Just chime in. Let me know where you're joining live from. And as we go through this, if you have questions or comments or thoughts you want to share about this, I would love to hear from you. Just because it's fun, we can have a live sort of interactive discussion about this. So, all right, so psychological safety. What the heck is psychological safety? You've probably heard it. It's something that's been talked about quite a bit over the last number of years in business particularly. And basically, psychological safety is a shared belief that the team that we're a part of, the group that we're a part of, is safe for interpersonal risk-taking, for risk-taking in general. It's safe for disagreement. It's safe for making mistakes. It's safe for speaking up. We can do those things within a team or a group that has psychological safety without the fear of negative consequences to our self-image, to our status, to our career. Essentially, we know we're not going to be shamed or ridiculed or kicked out of the group, sort of literally or figuratively, simply for having a different opinion or making a mistake or taking a risk. Psychologically safe teams, the people on those teams feel accepted and respected. And a lot of this work, my understanding of psychological safety comes from the research of Professor Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School. And I first became aware of psychological safety 3-4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, whenever it was that Google published the results of the study that they did called Project Aristotle. Maybe you heard about it, read about it. They basically spent 3 years studying what are the necessary conditions for teams to perform at the highest level. And they brought in all these researchers and scientists and super smart people to study this in a scientific way. And what they found after this 3-year-long study was that there were 5 findings. Number one, by far the most important, was psychological safety. It was the most important factor of high-performing teams. And when I talked to Karen May, who was the head of learning and development at Google at the time, who I've known for a number of years, about the findings from Project Aristotle, I asked her, I said, Karen, were you surprised by these findings? And she said, we weren't surprised that psychological safety was important. What we were surprised by was how important it was, that basically if a team has it, they've got a chance to be successful. If they don't, it's very difficult. And, people on psychologically safe teams, what we know from the research is they're less likely to leave. They're more likely to harness the power of diverse ideas from different team members. They actually bring in more revenue, and they're rated effective twice as often by executives. So it's super important. And one of the ways that I often think of psychological safety is it's kind of like group trust. Trust is more of a one-to-one phenomenon, whereas psychological safety is really about how we feel about the group. You and I can have trust with each other or not. And, that trust can be violated. It can be damaged. It can be rebuilt. It can be worked out. But that's more of sort of what exists between me and you as individuals in our relationship. The psychological safety is, how safe is the team? Is there a sense of trust that the team has? One way to think about this, especially in today's world where we find ourselves on Zoom or on Skype or on WebEx or Microsoft Teams or Google Meet or whatever video platform we find ourselves on, when you're with your team in a group setting, even virtually, do you feel safe to speak up? Do you feel safe to disagree? Do you feel safe to offer an idea or a suggestion, even if you're not 100% sure if people are on board or it's the right thing to say, or right? In the sort of matrix business world that we find ourselves in, there's your team, your kind of intact team that you work with, but there's all the different teams that you interface with. And, you know, maybe you're not members of those teams, but you have a dotted line, or you sort of sit in on some of those meetings, or it's a project or whatever the case may be. It's kind of the dynamic that exists amongst the team. So again, as you're watching this live, and thank you for joining, whether you're on Facebook or on LinkedIn or on YouTube, feel free if you have questions or comments, or you just want to, you know, weigh in and share your thoughts, your insights, your perspective, feel free to do that, because that's a fun way for us to interact here live. And if you're watching the video after the fact, you can still leave some comments. I will look back at the comments after the fact and respond if you have questions or comments. So let's talk a little bit about kind of what can you do, or how do you create more psychological safety? Because the reason is, so there's 4 pillars in my book. Psychological safety is the first one. I talked about this kind of in an overview way last week on LinkedIn Live, but it's basically, right, psychological safety, create psychological safety is number 1. The second pillar is to focus on inclusion and belonging. The third pillar is to embrace sweaty palm conversations. And pillar number 4 is care about and challenge each other. I'm going to talk about each of the 4 pillars over the next 4 weeks, but to talk specifically about psychological safety, the foundation of psychological safety is authenticity. And this is a big part of my work and has been for many years. So if you've read any of my books, if you followed my work or seen me speak, you've probably heard me talk about authenticity in different ways, whether it's on my podcast or TED Talks or other things. But let me ask you this. When you hear the word authenticity, or you hear the word authentic, what comes to mind? What do you think about? What does it mean to be authentic? How do you define authenticity? I mean, I hear people say things like honest or direct or transparent or open, real, genuine, vulnerable, you know, lots of different kind of words and phrases that we use. And all of these things absolutely are aspects of what authenticity is. But it's kind of, you know, I remember speaking at an event years ago, and I often share this example because it's poignant. And I was speaking at this conference. There was a couple hundred people at the event from different companies. It was a leadership conference, and I spoke about authenticity. And I get done speaking, and I walk off stage, and this guy gets up from the audience, makes a beeline right over to me, gets right in my face, and he says, I'm authentic all the time. And he was like upset, right? And I was like, all right, man, what's the problem? He said, well, I've lost some jobs because of that. I said, really? He said, yeah, not everybody can handle it. Now, at this point, I didn't know this guy, but I was getting a pretty strong sense of his personality. And I'm not exactly sure what prompted me to ask him this somewhat provocative question, but I did. I looked him right in the eye and I said, now tell me the truth. Is it authentic or obnoxious? He was shocked. I was actually shocked, like, oh my gosh, I said that. But after his moment of shock, and mine too, he kind of laughed and I laughed. And then he said, well, maybe a little bit of both. And I said, all right, I appreciate the honesty. I appreciate the self-awareness. I said, look, man, I don't know for sure, but if I had to guess, I bet it was the obnoxious that got you fired, not the authentic. Because authenticity isn't just about being brutally honest, telling it like it is. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with that, although that can cause problems, as we all have all learned. It's more than simply just honesty. And I think we get confused because we think it's about, like, how honest can I be without getting myself into trouble, or be, you know, and I think of authenticity on a continuum. On one side of the continuum is phony, in the middle is honest, and where we ultimately want to get to is authentic. And yes, if we operate in a phony way, we're not going to build a lot of trust. We're not going to create a lot of psychological safety. And if everyone's sort of operating in phony, inauthentic ways, but as we move towards authenticity, yes, honesty is halfway down, and honesty is good, right? How many of you were taught? My mother used to say this to me all the time: honesty is the best policy. She was right. Honesty is the best policy. Although, have you ever had an experience in your life, especially your professional life, where you were honest about something and it caused a problem? Yeah, right. We're honest, and what happens? I upset someone. I hurt their feelings. I offended them. I spoke out of turn. I put my foot in my mouth. I was trying to be helpful. I was trying to offer an idea or give some feedback, and instead of it being helpful, it was problematic. it made things worse. So we've all learned, okay, I'm not going to be phony. I'm going to be honest, but like mostly honest, like politically correct, honest, like makes me look good, honest. The problem with that, although normal, natural, how many of us operate, it's just exhausting. We have to constantly remember how honest can I be with you, and it gets tricky, and we're walking on eggshells. And in today's world where we're interacting primarily virtually with each other, it can be even harder because we can't pick up on physical cues or body language or different things. So more often than not, we're kind of holding back and walking on eggshells. And instead of it thinking about this binary thing of like, I'm either direct and I tell it like it is and say everything, or I sugarcoat it and dance around it and everything's very sort of, watered down and politically correct. What we want to think about is actually going beyond honesty. So yes, authenticity is about honesty, but we have to remove something from our honesty and we have to add something to our honesty. The thing we have to remove is our self-righteousness. Self-righteousness. What do I mean by that? Do you, like me, have a lot of opinions? Yeah. And do you, like me, often think that your opinions are right? Yeah. That's the issue. That's the self-righteousness. The issue isn't with your opinion. The issue isn't with the passion with which you hold the opinion. The issue isn't even whether you speak up or not. Some of us speak up more than others. The issue is the self-righteousness with which we hold the opinion. Because if I have an opinion and I'm self-righteous, like I'm right about it, and you don't agree with me, what does that make you? Wrong. Now we have a problem. The issue isn't that we disagree. That's not the issue. Teams with psychological safety disagree with each other, challenge each other, push each other. The issue isn't, again, it's not about the passion with which we hold the opinion. It's the righteousness. I'm right, you're wrong. Now, let's say we have a really open, honest debate about it, discussion. I disagree. No, I disagree. And we hash it out. And at the end of it, maybe we just agree to disagree. Or maybe somehow I influenced you and convinced you and you change your mind. Maybe you convinced me or influenced me. I changed my mind. Whatever the case is, being open and honest respectfully with each other, even if in disagreement, even a passionate disagreement, not a problem at all. In fact, can benefit our relationship, can benefit the team, the group. The issue is when we're self-righteous. I'm right, you're wrong. That's when it becomes a problem. And oftentimes we're more subtle about that. We don't even say it that directly. We just think it or tell other people about it, and it becomes insidious. It can even show up when we're just trying to influence other people. It may not be an out and out disagreement or debate. It's just, I think my way is the right way, but you think your way is the right way. And we passive aggressively go about trying to give each other feedback, if at all, or just think certain things. And the energy of that becomes problematic. The natural response to self-righteousness is defensiveness. Look at the country right now here in America. Look at the world right now. There's so much self-righteousness. We're swimming in it. And we can't hear other people or really listen to other people when they come at us self-righteously. One of my favorite quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King is this. He said, "We have no morally persuasive power with those who can feel our underlying contempt for them." We have no morally persuasive power with those who can feel our underlying contempt for them. So look, when you're getting into fights with people on Facebook about politics, or you're debating with people in your own family or on your own team about stuff, it's fine to have those debates, but if you do it in a self-righteous way, you're not going to influence them if it's coming from self-righteousness. Now look, there's a difference between self-righteousness, which is I'm right, you're wrong, I'm good, you're bad, I'm superior, you're inferior, and conviction, which is I believe this to be true, I'm willing to speak up about it, but I have enough humility, enough self-awareness to realize a couple of things. First of all, I might be wrong. Have you been wrong about some stuff in your life? Yeah. How about just in the last few months since we got into the pandemic? Yeah. We're wrong all the time. It's part of life. It's part of growth, is noticing when we're wrong and adjusting, making mistakes, updating it, right? And even if say it's an issue you have a lot of passion about or you have a lot of knowledge about, sometimes it's hard to acknowledge I might be wrong, but can I at least acknowledge maybe there's another way to look at this thing that I can't currently see, which is always the case. Especially if we have a team with any kind of diversity at all, it's like, oh, people are going to see things differently. So conviction is really healthy. Self-righteousness is really dangerous. And the challenge is that oftentimes when you and I are being self-righteous, we don't think we're being self-righteous. We just think we're right. And it gets in our way. And it damages our relationships. And it breaks down trust. And it makes psychological safety difficult, if not impossible. So we have to remove our self-righteousness from our honesty, which is hard, by the way. And also we need the people around us, the people on our team, the people in our groups to point out when we're being self-righteous, because oftentimes to us, we're blind to it. And then the thing we have to add is vulnerability. Vulnerability. This is what I call the authenticity equation. Honesty minus self-righteousness plus vulnerability. That's authenticity. But vulnerability, tricky, uncomfortable. Look, we talk more about vulnerability in our culture these days, thanks in large part to the great work of Dr. Brene Brown at the University of Houston, whose work I've been following for the last decade or so. And she's been studying for a couple decades vulnerability and other human emotions. But I love her definition of vulnerability. She says that it's risk, emotional exposure, and uncertainty. Risk, emotional exposure, and uncertainty. Can you think of anything meaningful or important that you've ever accomplished or experienced in your life, personally or professionally, that did not involve risk, emotional exposure, or uncertainty? Now, if it matters to us, right? If the team matters, if a relationship matters, if the work we're doing matters, if a goal we have matters, it's going to require one, two, or all three of those things. But the issue isn't whether or not we enjoy being vulnerable, it's do we embrace it? Are we willing to really lean into it? That's what's most important. And so leaning into vulnerability means we're willing to take some risks. We're willing to embrace uncertainty. I mean, we're collectively in a moment of global vulnerability right now. And we're also willing to be emotionally exposed with the people around us. Now, again, you might be a private person. You don't have to share all the deep, dark secrets about your life and what's going on. But you can be real in the moment. Mentor of mine, Eleanor, always likes to say to me, Mike, the truth can't be rehearsed. So can you show up authentically in the moment and really be real, lower the waterline on your iceberg, so to speak, as I often talk about, and be real with the people on your team. Be real with the people around you about how you actually feel about what's going on, right? Some things to think about in terms of ways to create more psychological safety on your team. The biggest thing that you can do is operate with authenticity, honesty, without self-righteousness, with vulnerability. But if you happen to be a leader within your family, within your team, or within any group that you're a part of, or even as a member of the team, like leader, like maybe a manager, like a leadership position, or just wanting to have an impact and be a leader in the group, one of the things you can do is frame the work that you're doing as learning problems as opposed to execution problems. What do I mean by that? So oftentimes, like, execution is important, outcomes important, clearly, but what's often more valuable, especially if we're going to create that sense of psychological safety, is like, hey, we've never been here before. We're going to need to learn some new things. We're going to need to try some new things. We're going to need to figure some things out. And you, as a leader or someone who wants to have influence, framing it that way, I'm going to need everybody's input. I'm going to need to know what you think. We're going to need to try to understand this better. We're going to need to pivot and adjust. I mean, this whole moment that we're in right now for the last 6-7 months is all about pivoting and adjusting. If we're constantly just focused on the outcome, which is important, clearly. I focus a lot on the outcome in my own business and with my own team because outcome is important. We want to ultimately win the game, whatever the game we're playing. However, from a team standpoint, from a culture standpoint, framing it as learning problems, learning challenges, then we can do something with that. Outcomes, we can't ever really control the outcome. We can influence it, but we can always focus on what we're learning. Another thing that we can do is acknowledge our own fallibility. Hey, look, I have blind spots. Hey, look, not like self-deprecating or self-criticizing, but acknowledging our own fallibility. I struggle with this, or I need some support on this, or this is not my strength, or not an excuse, but just the reality. I screwed this up. If that's the case, you acknowledging that, especially as a leader, but just as a member of the team or the group, models that for other people and lets people know, oh, we can be real here. We can be human here, right? Also modeling curiosity by asking lots of questions, being curious. Tell me more about that. I want to know about that. What do you think? Give me some input. Making sure people know it's safe to speak up, to disagree, to have a perspective. And to create opportunities for your team to connect and share authentically with each other. You know, one of the ways that I do this myself, and again, if you've read any of my books or you've followed any of my work over particularly the last 10, 12 years, as I've been focused on authenticity. My second book was called Be Yourself, Everyone Else Has Already Taken. And in every book since then, I have written about this exercise that I do with teams that I first learned from some friends and mentors of ours Rich and Yvonne Dutra St. John, who started and founded a great organization called Challenge Day that still exists. It's been around for 25 or so years. And they actually do work in middle schools and high schools all over the United States and around the country, around the world, excuse me. And they do an exercise that I had participated in a number of times and found incredibly powerful. And I have adopted that exercise and modified it a bit and do it with a lot of the leaders and teams and organizations that I work with. And it's called If You Really Knew Me. And the way the exercise works is basically, and it's best to be done again with your intact team. You can do it on Zoom or on, video. When we get back together and we're meeting in person, you can obviously do it in person, but I love to do it. There's kind of 3 different ways that I do it. An intact team, a group of 10, 12, 14 people, we can all do it together, which is ideal. If the group's a little larger, even on Zoom where you have breakout rooms, or back when we were in person, I'd sort of split the group up. Maybe I had 30, 40, 50 people in a room doing a workshop, or now have them again on Zoom, put people into groups of 4 or 5 people. But even when I'm speaking to a large group of people, this is harder to do virtually just by the platform. But I've done this where I'm speaking to a couple hundred or even a couple thousand people and have people pair up with people in the audience. But basically, here's the way the exercise works: is talking, explaining a little bit of context around psychological safety and authenticity, and using the iceberg as a metaphor and saying, hey, we're going to lower the waterline on our iceberg. We're going to be a little more emotionally exposed, a little more vulnerable with each other. And the way that it goes is that you just repeat this phrase: if you really knew me, you'd know this about me. And it's not so much, sometimes you do it with a group of people where people know each other really well, so that might sound weird to say, but it's really, if you really knew me in this moment, here's what you would know. And it's usually best, by the way, if you're facilitating this exercise with your team or with any group, that you go first. So you set the tone, you make it safe. And it's really just in the moment. If you really knew me, you'd know this. What would they know about you? How are you feeling? What are you thinking? What's going on down below the surface of the water, so to speak, on the iceberg as you lower the water line? And when you do that, and let everyone know, look, when you're talking, no one else will be talking. People aren't going to be making comments or jokes or giving you advice or feedback, or everybody just gets a minute or two, and you go for a minute or two and then invite someone else to go, and you go around the whole group and everybody gets an opportunity to share. And again, if you've broken people into smaller groups, usually I'll ask one person in each group to kind of go first and model it and then sort of facilitate, so the timing of it works. But what's amazing about this exercise, and I've been doing it, like I said, for probably 12 years now, maybe longer. And it doesn't matter if I'm, working with an executive leadership team of a, Silicon Valley company, or I'm working with teachers at a school, or I'm working with young people, or I'm working with financial advisors, or I'm working with engineers, really senior level, more junior level. I mean, here in the United States, or I'm somewhere else around the world, or these days virtually with people, what we find is this: the further down below the waterline we go, the more similar we become. One of the paradoxes, and we'll talk about this next week and the week after as we talk about inclusion and belonging, and then ultimately embracing sweaty palm conversations, is yes, we're all really different. And yes, your story and my story are super different. And especially if we look different and we have different backgrounds and ages and races and genders, and we come from different places. And even if we look similar, your life's experience and my life experience are probably going to be really different. Even we could have grown up in the same town, have friends in common, right? My book is called We're All in This Together, which is true and super important with teamwork and with respect to what's going on right now in the country and in the world. But it's really, we're all in the same storm. We're in different boats. And so what's happening in each of our boats is unique. Your story is unique. My story is unique. However, the further down below the waterline we go, we get to some pretty similar human experiences: joy, pain, excitement, sadness, gratitude, anger, peacefulness, fear, whatever the case is. This the range of human emotions that we all experience. And what's ironic in some ways, there's a phenomenon that I've learned, both as a communicator, but also as someone attempting to connect with lots of different types of people in different situations, is the more personal we're willing to share, the more universal it is to the people we're sharing it with. Now, again, that does not mean you have to disclose a lot of personal information necessarily. But the more willing you are to be vulnerable about your experience, you're usually not alone in that experience. And if you're the one willing to say it, or express it, often other people are. You remember like being in school and someone would ask a question and you're like, ah, thank God. Or even in business, someone says something, I don't understand that, or I don't agree with that, and there's like a sigh of relief in the whole group because it's like everyone else was feeling that way. It was super brave of that person to bring that up. They kind of spoke for a lot of other people. So the exercise completes with everyone sharing. And usually what comes out is sometimes people get emotional. Sometimes people share really deep things, really personal things, really whatever. There's no right or wrong way to do it. But the way that you conclude the exercise is thanking everybody and then having a bit of a discussion afterwards. What did you notice? How was that to share? How was that to listen? I usually like to ask the question, how many of you could relate to what other people were talking about? And almost everybody in every group I've ever done this with will raise their hand. The reason why is because the natural human response to vulnerability is empathy. So when someone shares about their real experience, and it's not empathy like I understand and know exactly what it's like to be you, because again, you may share something I can't relate to at all, right? That you're pregnant right now, or that you have 4 kids, or that you're, living in Zimbabwe, or, it could be like my life is like, I'm here, I'm a 46-year-old straight white man standing in my office, staring at my computer, talking to all of you on video, in California, doing what I do, having the family that I have, all that stuff. Like your life on paper might look really differently than me. But if you share how you're really feeling in the moment, while I may not be able to relate to the circumstance, I can definitely relate to the emotional experience that you're having. Again, joy, pain, excitement, sadness, gratitude, anger, the whole gamut. And just that acknowledgement, that recognition of, oh, I can relate, brings us closer together, has us connect, find more common ground with each other, thus creating more psychological safety within the team. Then we care about each other more. We know a little bit more about each other. We're more invested in each other. Therefore, that makes it safe to do what? Make mistakes, take risks, go for it, speak up, disagree, all the things that are necessary, and the ultimate benefits that have to do with psychological safety. So hopefully you found this useful and valuable. Hopefully you can see where this relates to you, to your life, to your team. My invitation to you is to put this into practice in some real way. What would it look like? Here, I'll give you a really practical application of this. That if you can start doing this personally and with your team, it'll make a big difference. Start asking for help more often. Most of us love helping others, but have a very difficult time asking for help from others. And if you ask, a couple things will happen. First of all, you might get some help. Answer is always no if you don't ask. Secondly, it might also be that you'll be surprised, right? Very interesting thing happens when we ask for help. What's our fear? Oh, we'll be rejected. They'll say no. Or we'll be judged. They'll think we're weak. Or someone will say yes and feel burdened when really they want to say no. But oftentimes what you'll find is that people will respond and be happy to help. And then the biggest unlock with respect to asking for help is that not only do we get some help when we ask, we give other people permission to do something that most people love to do, which is what? Help. Right? Sylvia, I appreciate your comment. You remember me doing that exercise in LA when I spoke to your group, when I talked about my first book, Focus on the Good Stuff. So that was way back. Focus on the Good Stuff came out in 07. It was probably sometime 07, 08, 09 when I first started really doing the If You Really Knew Me exercise. It's super powerful, but asking for help is a very practical and specific way to create more authenticity and ultimately more psychological safety within your team. Because, and also you got to let people know they can say no. You don't have to just say yes because someone asked, but we create that as a cultural norm. We'll ask for help. We'll respond in kind. Yeah. So look for ways that you can lower the waterline on your iceberg. You can show up more authentically, and you can ultimately create more of that group trust, that psychological safety for your team. Thanks for joining. I appreciate it. We're still kind of working out the kinks with this, but we were able to broadcast today on LinkedIn Live, Facebook Live, and also on YouTube. We may continue to do that. I will definitely be on LinkedIn Live moving forward on a weekly basis, and possibly we'll be continuing to do Facebook and YouTube. But stay connected with me, with my work, if you want to, at our website, which is mike-robbins.com, and on all these various social platforms. Next week, I'll be talking a bit about pillar number 2, which is focus on inclusion and belonging. Be well, take care of yourself, and remember, we're all in this together.